love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. I am your host, Peter Dixon. Great to see you all. Hope you're having a good day or evening, wherever you may be on this beautiful planet. Today I will be playing Season 2, Episode 7 that I did with Gordon Hammond. He was very much involved with the turmoil of post-Glacier View, an Australian pastor And as a young man back in the early 80s, he found himself essentially needing to leave the Adventist church. The pressure he was placed under was enormous. And I had reached out to Gordon to see if he could join me as we rewatch this episode today. But he is unavailable. And so we will watch it together. And I think you'll find it a fascinating interview. Now, back in the day when I was recording these programs, we were going live only into Facebook. And that's where they have resided all this time. And we are now bringing them out to the general public, out into the real world, out into the land of YouTube, and of course in Facebook as well. But come June 26, 2025, the year we are in now, Facebook are deleting all the live videos in groups, which is sad because there's been so many wonderful comments and interactions on those group comments. The videos that were played live and the comments that went on during and after have been phenomenal. So sadly, Facebook, in all their wisdom, are deleting those. So I'm moving fast, getting all this material up onto YouTube so that it's live there for everyone to see. And the past 6 that we've played in the last few weeks have all been up out in the YouTube land in some form or fashion in different places. However, today represents me putting one of the season 2, the incredible seminal Glacier View Des Ford 40th anniversary. It is now 45 years later, putting this episode for the first time for the general public to see. So we're entering new waters now as we head towards releasing all 86 interviews into the general public. So wish me well as I do that. But back in the day when I did this video, for some reason I didn't press record or live or something. And so we missed the first couple of minutes, but it's literally where he starts talking. It's all the preamble, rambling on stuff that's been never recorded that we won't hear. But that's okay. That was just all ramble anyway. And today's sponsor of this episode is Lavinia Power. So many of you are helping and reaching out and selecting an episode to sponsor. And I just really appreciate that. There's a lot of extra work going into these releasing season 2, which is a really important season to watch. If you're into SDAQ&A and you Q&A at all, and you haven't seen season 2 or episodes from it, then I really hope that you take some time and watch this incredible series where we really, in many ways, the first time ever, chatted in depth with people that were there, people who had thoughts on Glacier View and Des Ford, people who were affected by the whole thing. And there are some incredible interviews there. I just tried to get out of the way and get these stories heard. And, there was so many things that have been revealed because of this season 2. And interesting, it's just been in the private group all this time. And, but now it's going out into the general public. And so today, Gordon Hammond will be our interviewee, and this would have been around May 2020. And those listening on the podcasts and other platforms where it's just audio, I'm speaking in 2025. And the sponsor of today's program is Lavinia Power. Thank you so much, Lavinia, for your support. And if you're watching and you'd like to sponsor a program, just get in touch with me, and I'll tell you how that can be done. And the episodes are going fast. If there's a specific one you would like to sponsor, get in there quick. George Knight's gone. The 11-minute gospel's gone. they're going fast because people are not only wanting to support what I'm doing, but see the opportunity to even promote a website or a book or something that they have, or just to put their name to one of the interviews in this series. So yeah, get in touch with me if you would like to be a sponsor of one of the episodes. So what I'm going to do as I start the program today, for those who are listening or watching, from the point of it starting, I'm going to run the intro clip again. I won't be interrupting until the end. I may do a quick thank you again to Lavinia in the middle, but you'll be able to tell that that's what that is, because otherwise it can be confusing. You'll hear my voice if I interject and add my commentary, and then it'll be back to 2020 Pete, and then back to 2025 Pete. So I'm just not going to speak at all during the actual episode, but I would love your comments to come through, and we will bring some of them onto the screen in the end. Okay, let's go for it. We're heading back now to 2020, Gordon Hammond, Season 2, Episode 7. Enjoy, sit back and relax and take it all in.
Adventist. I think it's rather ironic, I'll say it at the beginning rather than the end, that the very thing that I have been misjudged for and degraded for and treated as a person who will never be in the kingdom, which was to leave a church, is the very thing that both of my grandfathers did.
I'm not sure what's happening there. This happened yesterday.
They left the church.
They left their Church of England.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes.
Presbyterian Church to join another group. They changed direction.
Mm.
And the very thing that we admired them for, I was condemned for.
Interesting.
And misunderstood. And the number of times that I know that I was used as an illustration of someone who will never be in the kingdom and who left the church, those terrible, terrible words. Any minister will know the implications of what's in them. They actually did the same thing. So there's some good genes in there.
Yeah.
It's the courage to actually pull out and change direction. And if you think that's easy, well, it's not. You've been down that track.
Yeah, hardest thing I have ever done.
It's incredibly traumatic.
Mm.
For me, so I grew up in Adventism. I can remember when I was a kid, one day I'd gone up to I grew up in Malaysia. And I remember one day going up to a little shop, little kedai, corner store, and I bought something to eat before dinner, which would have ruined my dinner. But I was cycling home, and as will happen in the tropics, there was this huge cumulus cloud. The sun had set, and when it sets on the equator, it goes down very quickly because of the location. But this cloud was high above it all. And I hit the pedals as hard as I go. Jesus was coming. This was it, the second coming. This was the glory in the clouds. And I was looking up there trying to see if I could pick him in the crowds of angels and so on. And I just went as hard as I could. My theology wasn't very good, though. We hadn't been through the tribulation and time of trouble. We hadn't fled to the hills. But I was absolutely convinced, and I raced home, flew through the door. I said to Mum, Jesus is coming. He's coming. He's coming. And we went outside, and the sun had gone. There was just this grey cloud up there. So that's how deeply ingrained it was in me. By the age of 8, here we go, I can actually show you. That is great controversy. Still in the original plastic that I had it. To Dear Gordon, with love from his gran, March 1954.
Wow.
That was my birthday present at 8 years of age.
At 8?
Yep, so cut out the calculations, I'm 74 now. And I read it.
A bit of light reading for an 8-year-old?
Yeah. And I absorbed it. So I grew up petrified about the time of trouble, petrified about my sins, how I'd be in the judgment. It was all deeply, deeply ingrained. And then something interesting happened. Malaya, as it was then, was my father was a medical missionary there, and he started the medical work in Penang. And of course, the traditional way of building a church is evangelism. And some of the American evangelists would come out, they'd pick the best and try and start churches and congregations in Malaysia or Malaya. And this was my first true introduction to Adventism. This is when I made my decisions and commitment. It would have been around about that time. And the evangelist was none other than J.R. Spangler.
Oh.
So I've known Spangler since about 1956, 1957. And he ran a mission in Penang.
Wow.
And I was absolutely enthralled. And I would see these beasts come out and the ultraviolet light illuminate them. And I was gobsmacked, and I started to understand it. So I got the whole understanding, and this is very relevant to what comes along later on. I had the whole understanding of what makes an Adventist, because that's when I became an Adventist. And he actually ran 2 missions. I think another one about 2 years later, and I went through both of them. And so I saw the sequence of the prophecy virtually proving the Bible to be true. And once you've got there, prophecy also showed the rise of Rome. It showed Rome tampering with the law of God and changing the Sabbath. And prophecy showed the rise of a remnant church with the prophet. This is condensing it down into the very, very basics. And so that was the whole thrust of evangelism. And without question, the evangelist is the key person in the church, and we can come back to that later. But if you look at Glacier View, you'll understand what happened in Glacier View wasn't so much about the academics. It was about the evangelists, for a simple reason, because what they did was they indoctrinated the people who came into the church. And they were the most important, influential people in the denomination, even more important than the administrators, because they're the ones who had the capacity to grow a church.
Yeah.
And convince people they should be paying tithe. And Adventist Inc. needed that tithe, and it needed those numbers. But I sat through it all, and at the end of it, I had Bible studies with Pastor Chong Tat Kong. Now, you all know Bruce Lowe.
Yes.
Bruce Lowe married Ruth Chong,
Oh.
who was my pastor's, she was his daughter. So there's another interesting connection that comes through. It's basically saying I was just Adventist through and through and through and through. And I'd actually planned to study medicine. But growing up with a father who was doing research and study and further degrees in his medicine, he was a doctor, completely stuffed my education. It was really bad. I did have 3 years continuous high school in Penang in a Catholic school, which was interesting. It was a very strict Catholic school. Every morning started with the Hail Mary and prayers. I can still hold the world record for how quickly you can say the Hail Mary. And I found it ironic. I was being a Daniel. Here I was in a Catholic school surrounded by Catholic teachings and brothers and priests and so on. But it's the only place I could get an education. But it didn't stand me in good stead for when I came to Australia. So Dad said, if you don't get a Commonwealth scholarship, you're on your own. So I came to the end of high school and I missed out on the college scholarship. I could have done medicine, but I didn't have the capacity to earn my way through university for 6 years. So I went to Avondale and I did ministry. I was at this dilemma, where do I go? And it wasn't such a hard decision because I was so deeply ingrained in Adventism that I figured that I probably wouldn't even finish my course, that the Lord would have come by then. So why not be part of the proclamation of the great message and do the right thing and be a servant of God? And if people ever had the idea that I was somehow deviating or against or unsupportive of the denomination, they've got it wrong. I was one of the most Pharisee amongst the Pharisees ministers you could have found.
What
My
year did you
sermons
go to
were-
Avondale?
I was between 65 and 68. I graduated.
Right.
Now, two things did come out of Avondale, which I never regret. I'm going to confess I can hardly remember anything of what I learned or what I was taught. It's probably more like it, because I don't respond very well to teaching, but I'm a great learner. And I have this funny brain which says, if this isn't relevant, I won't take much notice of it. So the first thing I ever look for is relevance. And some people stood out and might be surprised to know that it's a confession time. I really didn't get Des Ford. And some people will find that surprising, but I wasn't the only minister. I was so deeply ingrained in Adventism that I really couldn't see where Des was coming from and the implications of it. I loved Georgie. He was a wonderful man. And last year we were in the States, and we drove down to meet his daughter, Estelle, and Iris. Lovely, lovely couple. And she shared some of her story, and I thought, gee, what a great man he was.
Yeah.
And he had it rough. I tell you what, he never told his story.
No.
And he had it rough. And it's up to Estelle if it's going to be told, but he didn't want people to know. I'm just saying that he had it really rough. He was such a sincere, good man. He put you to sleep in class. But Georgie is a wonderful man. Russell Crans was an interesting character. These are some of the names that
Lecturers, yeah. And Des was a lecturer at the time too.
Yeah, Des was there. Des didn't make much impact on me, and I think it's because I was so Adventist. It's simple as that. There was one person who did influence me later on, but I'll come to that. Am I rabbiting on too much?
No, I'm fascinated.
Yeah, feel free to interject if anyone else wants to ask a question. And when I graduated, the two things about college. One was on my last day at college, I left. On my first year at college, the last day, I went down to Melbourne. I got a job lined up with the CSIRO to do work during the holidays. Right. And I was on the platform in Central Station. And he was a bit of a sparring partner, but a girl I'd never had any real interest in, told me she was going to Mildura to teach. Her name was Sally McGregor. And, I get emotional when I think about her.
Yeah.
She's such a wonderful, wonderful lady. But I guess part of that is the providential leading of God, that he led me to this most wonderful woman. And once I get my breath together again, don't mind me being emotional. I give myself permission. So
we do too.
Beautiful story.
This is a safe space.
And she said she was going to Mildura, and I said, "Well, come on the train. Well, I'll catch up with you on the train." But better still, my mum said, "Look, you're going to start work in the morning. I'll give you a first-class ticket to go down to Mildura, down to Melbourne." And so I said to Sally, "Come up to first class and we'll talk, and I'll tell you all about Mildura." Now, by this stage, I was already starting to understand the dynamics of churches, even though I hadn't trained for ministry. But it was a church which everybody's at everybody's throat the whole time. And I looked back, and there was a wonderful man there who had been an elder, but he had a shop as you came into Mildura from the New South Wales side. It was a service station, and he had in that service station, like every other one does, he sold cigarettes. So he was disfellowshipped for that. And the committees and the legalism and I thought, boy, oh boy, oh boy. And I wanted to warn Sally of what to expect. There are some prickly customers, real legalists.
Mm.
And the upshot of that was she came up in first class and sat down beside me, and I started to tell about Mildura. The ticket inspector said, "Tickets, please," and she saw her ticket, and she said, "Well, you'll have to go back to economy."
Mm.
And I said, "Look, I'll do a deal with you." I said, "This young lady is in economy, but she's already had somebody burn a cigarette mark on her dress." I said, "If you go down to that non-smoking area and enforce the rule about non-smoking down there, then I suggest she'll go back there. But in the meantime, she's staying here with me." So the training, by the way, was called the Spirit of Progress. And I didn't waste the moment.
All these signs.
That's the greatest thing that came out of Avondale for me.
Yeah.
The only other subject I do remember, and I remember everything in it, and it was the most practical, wonderful subject. In my final year, I did an extra subject, which was joinery. And that taught me the craft of tools and building and timber, and that practical aspect of life has been applied to so many ways and saved me literally tens of thousands of dollars. I've just finished replacing my decks and stairs around the house.
Yeah. I wish I had that training.
Yeah, and it was the best subject I ever did at college. So I came out pure Adventist, totally uncontaminated by Des Ford, didn't even know what he was on about. I was inspired by Russell Kranz. He took us down to Albury, and we were part of the mission team of George Burnside. So I sat at the feet of George.
Yeah.
And in the daytime, when there weren't meetings, he would call all the workers, the ministers together. It was the entire graduation class of ministry in that year, in 1968. And I sat at the feet of George, and he was my mentor. He was my example.
Yeah.
Took notes of everything he did. And then the next year, I was out in the field. I had no training or skill in human interaction, in psychology, in counseling, and pastoral care. I was never mentored in pastoral care. The one thing I had to do was go out and get Bible studies. And no one told me how to do that, and I was on an evangelistic team in Maitland. There was an evangelist, actually two evangelists, and it was the most boring, dull time. I found out afterwards that these two guys were wife swapping. And that was my mentoring, and all they did was badmouth me to the president. And so right from my first year, I got this reputation of being rebellious and a minister with attitude. And that stuck with me the whole time.
Wow.
So I became a boundary rider.
Even though, ironically, you were dyed in the wool, straight down the line, Adventist.
But I wasn't easily pushed around. And my biggest fault it wasn't a fault really. My biggest strength was I'd ask questions.
Yeah.
And whenever ministers came together, I would find if there was flaws or paradoxes or something wrong in what was being said in those meetings, I'd ask questions. And you could see the embarrassment, and they didn't know how to answer the questions. And so instead of admitting, well, I don't know, it came back onto me.
It's interesting that people that ask questions, often people will try and attack the person, not the question or the topic.
Yeah.
They attack the player, not the ball.
It's a classic move of invalidation.
Yes.
And it wasn't until years later when I was working in Sydney City Mission that I started to understand the process of invalidation. And gee, that was a powerful revelation. If I had known now what I knew, if I know, if I'd have been back then and through the whole issue of Glacier View, and if I was to take what I know now about the subject of invalidation and share it with ministers in training, it would totally change the direction of the church.
Mm.
I would guarantee that there is hardly any minister in training who has ever been exposed and understanding the process of invalidation. But it was the invalidation and the degradation of ministry that eventually caused the church to arrive where it's at today.
Yeah.
And I know because I came through it. I'll give you some examples shortly. But that's basically where it came. So I was 5 years in North New South Wales. And I was in small churches, rundown churches. But always the expectation there was, let's look at your report. How many baptisms have you got? How many Bible studies you've got? How many of those Bible studies are converted into baptisms? And I had this rather paradoxical thing that I didn't get many baptisms, but boy, when they hit that tank, they drowned. You know, they were totally immersed in Adventism. And today, still people who I baptized are as staunch as ever in everything that I taught them. And that's maybe a good thing. I had no problems with that at all. But it didn't stand me very well because I could never show. And whenever I left a church, the next step would be to send an evangelist in to somehow or other make up for what the deficiencies there. And I would have made a very good pastor if I had been trained in it, because when I left the denomination eventually and worked in Sydney City Mission, my work became purely pastoral. And it was a delight to be in an environment where I no longer had to persuade people to think differently.
But
that is where my understanding of the gospel came. Yeah, I was working with people who were at the very, very, very bottom of the ladder. These were the Zacchaeus that Christ met. These were the prostitutes. These were the criminals. These were the cheats. These were the murderers. Literally, these were people I was working with. And there was no pretense. They couldn't turn around and tell me how good they were. And what would be the point of me telling them how bad they were? They knew that already. There's only one option open to me, and this is what my path of Christianity went. And I'm not Orthodox Christian in any way. I'm not a fundamentalist Christian. I've come to the point where I see the Bible is not black and white and absolute. Okay, so I'm not a sola scriptura person. But somewhere through those pages of Scripture, even though we don't know, we can never say with absolute certainty anything about the Bible is true. Impossible, because we weren't there when it was written. And we don't know how much it's been tampered with through the ages. But there is an echo. There's a shadow. There's a trace of the original historical Jesus. That's who I sought. And there was a person who influenced me in that way, and that was Morris Venden. You don't hear very much about him, but he influenced a lot of ministers.
For a while there, you'd hear a lot, and then he's kind of...
and then he disappeared because Glacier View blew up and Morris Venden sort of dissolved. Because he was in this predicament where he talked about the love of Christ and the acceptance of Christ and the openness of sinners to come in. He didn't talk about righteousness by faith very much, you know, if you go back to stuff. He just quietly talked about the Jesus story, Mary and the forgiveness of sinners, Zacchaeus, you're out of your tree, those famous tapes. And here I was stuck way, way down in Esperance. And communication isn't what it was today. I was out of the loop. I didn't hear what was happening in Glacier View. I didn't hear what was happening at Des Ford. I hardly knew a thing about the forum meetings. It just didn't filter that far down. And that's typical of a lot of ministers. We didn't know what was happening. Okay, the guys in college did. The people in the city churches did. They'd meet and they'd talk. But those of us who are sort of holding the church together in the country and the little congregations and pastoring them, we didn't have a clue what was happening. No. So here we were isolated, but I did get hold of Venden's tapes, and I'd listen to them. You know, Esperance was 700 kilometres from Perth. Yeah. My parish extended in a radius of about 300 or 400 kilometres, and you'd be sitting in the car and I'd listen to his tapes. And what he taught me, when I was listening to that, I was thinking, the gospel of Christ is not And there's people who are going to jump him in this, and I don't care. Jump your hardest. You can't touch me. You remember that song, You Can't Touch Me?
Yeah.
I'm part of the union. You're a muser. I'm untouchable now. But I came to the conclusion, really, that the message of Christ was, from Christ himself, was love. The message of righteousness by faith came from Paul. But Christ was the demonstration of whatever that was, that it doesn't matter who you were, I'll accept you. So I learned the same thing. When I went to the mission, I learned to accept people. And my teachers became the people I was ministering. They taught me more about love than I could ever teach them. And they would pray for me instead of me praying for them.
Wow.
I remember one guy came up, he said, can we pray? I said, sure. And I was getting ready to do my big pastoral thing. Let's bow our heads. And before I could even get there, he was praying for me.
Yeah.
And another experience I had, as you know, I've traveled a lot, and that's been my life for the last 25 years. I was in Malaysia, in a mosque, and I was looking around at the beauty of the mosque, and this little guy comes up to me. It was the muezzin of the mosque. He's the guy who gets up and wakes everyone at 5 a.m. through the loudspeaker system. And he started talking to me, and I had enough knowledge of Malay because I grew up there, and his English, and together we had a good little conversation. And I said, at the end of it, he wished me God's blessing, and he said, can I pray for you? So what does an Adventist minister do when a Islamic muezzin says, can I pray for you?
Yeah, that's a fascinating.
And it was one of the most beautiful prayers I've ever heard. And it was said for me. Now, I can't go around and judge that guy because he's got a different nameplate to what I've got. These are the sort of things that we're always aware. A lot of the discussion and controversy that would happen even within the church. And this came out of righteousness by faith. If we're saved by the grace of God and we're declared righteous in his presence, in other words, as Jesus says, I love you as you are, you're my son, that's all I need to know. I'm sorry, Paul, I don't need to know the rest. It's declared, I'm a son of God, you are mine, and I love you. That's all I need.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
That. Yeah.
So I have never sought the argument, and I never got involved in the argument of trying to prove anything, whether it was through prophecy or anything else. There was a very simple message. And at the heart of that, part of that echo that came through everything that Jesus said was this idea of spirituality. And so my transition in recent years has been saying, what is the spiritual journey? And the spiritual journey is not based around a day of the week or some behavior or some ritual or some fundamental beliefs. It is about living life, the life of love the whole time. And I never worried whether I'm being judged by God. I don't worry about my sins. I don't feel I need to have them atoned for. That is something about him to work out. All he says is, I love you as you are. That's good enough for me. And it keeps it very simple. And I go and love other people. And that's what makes the difference. That is what gives life meaning for me.
Yeah.
It's nice not having to tell other people that they have to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And I really, really got weary, terribly weary of being in an environment where people had this wonderful set of rules. And Adventism is legalism. 27 fundamentals. Now, don't tell me that's not legalism. 27 rules which you have to live your life by.
28 now.
Yeah, I realised that. I wasn't around then. Let's go back into my time. And that's telling you how to live your life. Then on top of that, we've got a pile of red books. And if you can't find your way through, there's these blue ones which will help you there, which now you can do online, of course. Makes it a lot easier. And then there was an administration which told you what to do. So when I look back at what happened at Glacier View, you had this, and this to me became the whole issue of Glacier View. not whether Des was right or whether it was the 2,300 days. The whole issue was authority. Who has the power? Now, when you have a legalistic organization that defers to the rule books, those who are then put in charge have an obligation to make sure that the rules are observed. The identity is tied up with those rules. So the whole problem with Des, as I see it, okay, you can disagree all you like, but when Des brought up the issue of the sanctuary, and Des started emphasizing the righteousness by faith, there was serious problems, because those in charge could see the implications of that. If the sanctuary was wrong, if 1844 was only a non-event, then everything that followed on, and that's where I go back to what the evangelist said, and I was so familiar with evangelism, it was this progression you led people through to indoctrinate them into the church. And they got to that point in the church where they believed everything there. It was the wonderful Advent message that they left everything behind. My grandparents did this, and they joined this church of God, this remnant. And they paid their tithe to it. They invested their lives in it. And there's nothing they loved more than to have a mission. And when a mission came to town, they would go back and listen to the evangelist, and the lights would dim, and this person would come up, and the hush.
Yeah.
The hush was from the Adventists. Here we are, we're hearing our wonderful message again.
Yeah.
And it was, I remember it. You know, I can remember, don't forget where I came from. I had the same experience. I know what it was. Now, here was a guy saying, guess what? Those 2,300 days is bullshit. Okay? I haven't heard it called that before, but never mind. This isn't it just came out.
I'll beep that later.
No, you don't. I'm responsible for what I say. And then that means everything else. You mean the sanctuary, the cleansing of the sanctuary, the judgment, the Sabbath. You mean I've been paying my tithe to the church, which has got it all wrong? And then he starts talking about righteousness by faith, and you look at that. Oh, you mean I don't have to do all these things. I don't have to keep all these rules. And if you ask a person, if a person doesn't keep these rules under righteousness by faith, are they still covered by the blood of Christ? Yes. Okay, so why worry about the rules? There's a paradox here. And one of the things I've come to appreciate and I'm intrigued by is the whole process of paradox. And there's only one answer to paradox. Paradox does two things. One, it keeps you humble. You stop being dogmatic when you recognize I don't have all the answers. So it stops you being dogmatic and it keeps you humble. And you get to the stage, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
And there's nothing more to throw you into the hands of God than saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
Now, I've got to trust you to help me through this because I don't have the answer. And the way you find that strength is not by things you do, but who you are. And it is that spiritual life that brings you through every crisis. So this was the problem I was facing and the administration was facing, that if they had have condoned what Ford said, end of the Adventist of Seventh-day Adventist, and if they had condoned righteousness by faith, end of Sabbath. So the very moniker of the denomination, its brand was at stake.
Under threat.
So underneath it all was this whole business of gone is the Sabbath, gone is the latter-day message of the Advent and the judgment. So they had to sack him. They had to silence him.
Like all good politicians, they're thinking ahead. They're thinking of not just the next move. They're thinking of...
It's an organization. It's a business. And it depends on the institutions, which are large money-making institutions, which are suffering now in America, and they must be very worried. It is also dependent on the congregation. Now, here comes this interesting part where the minister is the link between the administration and the congregation, the only link.
Mm.
If the administration want to get something through to the churches, who do they go through?
To go through the pastor.
Minister, yeah. And if there's feedback to the administration, it's the pastor. Who builds the churches?
Mm.
Who does the baptizing?
Mm.
Who keeps those congregations together?
Mm.
The pastor.
Mm.
So really the pastor is the vital link, the most important person in the church.
Mm.
And I went through this process of degrading the minister and invalidating them. So it showed up in their wages, it showed up in their conditions, it showed up in the expectations. The expectations on a minister are awful. You've got the expectations of what God thinks you should be doing, your own expectations. You've got your wife's expectations and family. You've got your congregation's expectations. You've got your conference president. You've got the whole denomination expecting you to be this kind of perfect person, representing, upholding the whole denomination. And don't you dare question it. You do as you're told. Now, that's a sure formula for people who will be screwed up.
Yeah.
I know I was. It wasn't until I did clinical pastoral education that I was confronted very gently by a very fine Anglican priest, actually, who was my instructor in North Shore Hospital, that I came to understand just how fragile I was and how screwed up I was. And the strategies you use of being dogmatic, and I got tired of being dogmatic. I had to know everything. I had all the answers. I couldn't afford to be wrong. And then when Glacier View came along, in my particular congregation at that time, it was awful, because people would ask me questions about Glacier View, and I really didn't know a lot, but they'd been reading stuff, and they'd set me up, and they would put down in shorthand what I was saying. And then eventually, and the rot of what happened to ministers started in Western Australia. I'm going to sort of tell it the story as it is, because I've never told it before, but it should happen. This came from the minister. It started off with three guys, Wayne Popke, Heinz Susenbach, and Lauren Jenner, who were called in one at a time into the office. Basically, they were asked three questions. Do you believe in Ellen White? Do you believe in 2,300 days in 1844? And do you believe the Adventist Church is the remnant church? If you could not answer black and white yes to those, you were given a couple of weeks study leave and come back with your answers. And if you still had any doubt at all, in their case, they were fired on the spot.
Who was it a conference president, or did they bring the...
It was the conference president and the committee. Now, here's an interesting twist for me.
What year would that have been? This
would have been 1982, probably.
Okay, so it's post Glacier View, of course, yeah. Yeah,
81. It was immediately after, it happened immediately after Des was sacked. Now, I'll tell you the link, what happened in Western Australia. And this will explain why I got into such deep problems. The conference executive brought these guys in and they sacked them. And it was terrifying, because I knew that I was then in the firing line. Now, when Des was sacked, the committee that removed his credentials sat in Wahroonga, and it was comprised of a division committee with representatives from the conferences and the laity. Now, one of the laymen who was on the committee that sacked Des was my senior elder.
Wow.
Now, he was as right-wing CB Adventist as I used to be. Okay, so he probably felt very privileged to be in a position where he could preserve the integrity of the church by getting rid of this error. And very influenced by George Burnside, and you could start to see how the evangelists started to come in. The conference executive also was an evangelist, and so he was on the conference executive, he was on the division executive, and he was my senior elder.
What church were you in at this stage?
Esperance.
Oh, this is Esperance still, yep. Yeah.
He came back from the sacking of Des on the Friday, got into Esperance got back down to Esperance, and the next morning he confronted me in church. And he said, we need to have a board meeting to discuss where you're coming from.
So he's on a roll now.
He was on a roll. He was going to purge his own church. And he lined me up.
Wow.
And he got the president lined up as well. And without any warning...
President of the union there or the SPD?
This was the Western Australian president. He brought him down to Esperance without telling me, and he called a board meeting. And next thing I get this, he calls me and he says, we're having a board meeting about, we're concerned about your beliefs. And I said, no, we're not. I said, I call the board meetings and not you. I said, you can ask me to call a board meeting. But I'd had a lot of conflict with him anyway. He ruled the church with a iron rod, and he was quite dictatorial. Pretty much old school, that's the way it happened.
Common story. The head elders are the kind of the thread. The pastors come and go.
Yeah. But
the head elders are there.
They say it. And the church has far too much control about what it can do with pastors. So he called this meeting, and I get this phone call from the president saying, you have to be here. The meeting's here. And I said,
who was the president?
Gordon Lee. And so I turned up to this meeting without any warning, had no idea what the agenda was. It went for nearly 5 hours. And they just went for me as hard as they could on every point of doctrine. And at the end, they were so frustrated they got nowhere. I was starting to learn some of the principles of survival. But when I came home, I lost it. And so did my wife. And when your president says to your wife, and she's in tears, you look beautiful when you cry. Boy, I ordered him out the house. I sent him out. I said, don't you ever darken my door again. So I wasn't on good terms with my boss. And I never saw him again.
Wow.
Now that's the degradation of the ministry that I'm talking about. And
you'd kind of come to a separate conclusion of grace and love and the gospel and a focus on Jesus' teachings and love, and that's all you need. Separate to what Des was talking about, and yet they were kind of still putting you in the same basket.
At that stage, I was still a dyed-in-the-wool Adventist.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what Des was saying.
Yeah, but because you're a person that questions and asks questions.
No, I went to college under Des, and it was assumed that I was influenced by him.
Yeah.
I was judged by, what's the word I'm looking for? By association. So I wasn't even, I have never, ever been, quote, Fordian. Never.
Fordite.
Morris Venden who taught me to love.
Yes.
And soften my ministry.
Yeah.
And my wife and I cried most of that night and almost all of the next day. And I remember saying to her, it's over.
Wow.
Finished. It was that catharsis which so many have had and never shared, nobody ever heard about, because we ceased to exist. When we left, when we're sacked, we cease to exist. And if you want to give an example, it was in my homecoming, 50th homecoming, a couple of years ago, that I thought, well, I'm going back to it. And he was just a handful of ministers from that year. And when we saw each other, we just wept. And
they'd all left as well.
What's that?
They'd all left as well.
Yeah, a few of us came along, and I realized that none of them had counseling. All the pain was still there. Nobody heard their story.
And you didn't keep in touch with
how could you?
Other ministers that left as well. Yeah.
Where did they go?
Yeah. I had this kind of idea that when everyone left, they might have been communicating somehow, but at different times then, wasn't it?
Dangerous.
You couldn't start a Facebook group.
You had to start a life. When I left, when I finally resigned, I handed my letter of resignation to Bob Parr, and I stood there with no money, no home, no job, no qualifications, and but I made that decision when that night, and I said, it is finished. It was a spiritual, prophetic insight. And I said, somewhere in the next 2 or 3 years, I've got to consolidate my life. And I did CPE when I came to Sydney, and that's a fascinating story on its own, which I haven't got time for. Look at the time. We've been going for over an hour. But I got out of West Australia by the skin of my teeth. Literally, the morning I left, I had arranged to take my holidays early. And instead of having a holiday, I called the removal trucks in and I left. And that morning, the phone was ringing in the empty house for me to come to the conference office to be questioned about my theology. And I would not have survived that. I'd have gone the same way as Wayne and the other guys. And the phone was ringing in an empty house. And I was halfway down the road to Kambalda or Mawson, driving away to freedom. And that's a story in its own. But I should mention something of it because it gives an idea, again, of the degradation of the ministry. And if I'm boring you, then come back for part 2 later on.
Not at all.
You know what the date was? October 22. The day of judgment had come and nothing happened. Oh, dear. But that was a torrid meeting, and at the end of that catharsis, I knew that I was going to leave. I just didn't know when. So I was on hold, and I went and I studied clinical pastoral education, which should be taught in college for every minister, full year of it. It would make an enormous difference to pastoral care. And then I started a course, did a degree on behavioral sciences. So I qualified as a psychologist and sociologist, anthropology, all of those disciplines in together, which gave me some sort of credibility as a person and employability. And the upshot of that is Esperance didn't want me at all. So Gordon Lee moved me up to Kalgoorlie, which was probably the most conservative, isolated church anywhere in Australia. I couldn't communicate with anyone. You talked about why didn't the ministers keep in touch? Too dangerous.
No, yeah.
Couldn't be seen. And where they went to, nobody knows. They disappeared. It's taken me, that's why I formed this group Beyond Glacier View. I've been trying to find out what happened to my friends. Let's hear their story. And a lot has come out of it since then. And it's been nice to catch up with them. But and I'll make this my final part of what I'm saying today. In Kalgoorlie, the church there, the elders got together. They had a close dialogue with Esperance, and they insisted that I take a sermon on the sanctuary, that I never talked on the Bible, the church's doctrines. Now here again is the control and the manipulation and the invalidation of the minister. So I thought, how am I going to do this? I had no way around it. The board had insisted that I do it. And they had it lined up. And when I did it, they were in touch with my president, informing him. Even before then, it was decided that Gordon Lee said he was going to send down Jeff Ewald and Fergie Mackay to labor with me and discuss my theology. I said to Gordon, don't bother. I said, I won't even open the door to them. They're not qualified. They don't have anything more in their understanding of the Bible than I do. So just don't waste their time or my time. I was on thin ice, but I was fighting. I even had the ministerial secretary for the union, Keith Hankson, come along and labor with me for 2 days. And he gave me the green light, and that was a real problem to them. But it was wonderful for Bob Parr, who called me across, because he said, Hankinson's given this guy the approval and you're welcome to come. Much to the chagrin of Athol Tolhurst, who was furious when he found out that I'd gotten to Greater Sydney. And he called 4 meetings and interrogated me in depth and in length.
So, sorry, you got a green light to get a job in Sydney?
Yeah, to be called to Sydney.
To which church?
Keith Hankinson from the other union had interviewed me. So when Bob called me, West Australia said, no. But Keith had been there beforehand and interviewed me because of the sermon I'd taken in Kalgoorlie. I got ahead of myself there.
Right. So
I'll explain the sermon and then it'll all fit in. Go on.
Yeah. So just for me, just with timeline, so the Esperance leaving after the 5 hour
Yep.
interrogation, you didn't leave the church then, you're saying you literally left being a pastor at Esperance.
No, no. It's at Esperance, after that meeting, I said it's over.
Yes.
I was destroyed.
Yeah.
No longer was I an Adventist.
Right, but you still hung in there.
I had to do something. I had a wife and two
Yes,
kids.
I see
Look
what
at
you're
the
saying.
age of your daughters.
I see what
Same,
you're
same
saying.
age.
And that's when you went to Kalgoorlie.
I then went to
And
Kalgoorlie.
in Kalgoorlie, you got offered a call to Sydney.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
But
And
I
so,
took this sermon in Kalgoorlie on the sanctuary. And it
right.
was
Oh,
very
yes,
simple.
yes. So you went ahead and did
I
that.
photocopied all the church's fundamental beliefs as far back as they went, including the Dallas Statement with the 27 fundamentals. One more to go yet, but it was a bit premature. And I gave everybody in the congregation a copy of the things. So they had them in their hands there, they're reading them, looking up. And I did a big whiteboard, not like your little piddly thing. And you don't have to show it to me, yeah. And I just put four columns of the different statements and went through the sanctuary and showed how over the years it had been changing and changing and changing.
That's that would have been.
And there they had the evidence in front of their eyes. People were so angry. This is cognitive dissonance coming in now. They could not believe that the church had changed its position on the sanctuary.
Yes, because a lot of people think it's like this is how it was. This is now new theology, but you're saying it was changing lots.
This was in the
anyway.
fundamental beliefs. You couldn't go much higher. And it's interesting, one of the interviews that Athol Tolhurst had with me, he started to question me on my belief on the doctor, on the sanctuary. So I swung it around and I asked him. And given an evangelist a chance to talk, and you can't shut them up. So he went through and explained it. At the end of it, I said, well, do you realize, Athol, that what you're saying does not reconcile with the 27 fundamental beliefs? So here you are questioning me about the doctrine, but you haven't even got it worked out yourself. I didn't make much of a friendship with that.
Is that because were those organic changes, or were there some quite different changes? And
it was
over what time period are you talking about?
It was the influence ultimately of questions of doctrine and theologians who were trying to bring some transition and change into the fundamental beliefs and the sanctuary doctrine. They're just trying to open the door a little bit to the cracks open a little bit.
Right.
So this was a radically different statement to the previous ones. You didn't have the literal sanctuary up there and Jesus poring over the books and asking for a cup of tea while he went next chapter and who's next, please. None of that stuff. You know, it was trying to spiritualize it.
So his description of the sanctuary events didn't line up with the Dallas 27 fundamentals. Is that what you pointed out to him?
And I challenged him on that.
And his lined up with a pre-QOD version of...
Sorry?
Would his version have lined up with a pre-QOD?
Yeah, his was fundamental Adventism, what I grew up with.
Right.
Okay, it was what the evangelists taught.
Yes.
Exactly. And as a result of that, the folk were furious. They could not believe what they were reading. So they didn't take it out on the church, they took it out on me. And I walked home from church, and the church was home was right next door, and the phone was ringing, and there was Gordon Lee on the phone. He should have been in church somewhere, but no, he was waiting for this. And he said, what's going on here? Well, I said, I'll send you the sermon, I've taped it, and I'll send you my notes, which I did. He couldn't believe it. So he sent Keith Hankerson across to interview me. Keith Hankerson went through my notes and listened to my sermon. He said, this is amazing stuff. He said, we should be putting this in the record. And I said, well, Keith, it won't happen. I said, this is getting people very upset. This is what's happening in our church today. This is not acceptable. So we've got this cognitive dissonance between what the congregation has been taught, what the administration taught. The scholars are saying something else, and the poor beggar in the middle of it all is the minister who sees everything that's happening.
Yeah.
So let's fire the minister.
So the congregation have been brought into the church, like you've said, by the evangelist. The administration, the academia, the politicians, the admin have got another agenda, and the poor pastors in the middle are trying to...
Oh, you can't live like that. You
No.
cannot live like that. You know, since I resigned, I've had 2 lives. I've had a wonderful life at Sydney City Mission, and from nothing, I built up a chaplaincy department which meets the needs of about 100,000 people every year, spiritual needs. And then I said, okay, time for Sally to develop her career. I'll work with you now instead of you working with me. And I have seen the world and had the most amazing experiences as a photographer, videographer, and a few other things.
You've embraced life, and
It's been wonderful.
people have embraced you. But as a pastor, there was no one nurturing you from any side, by the sounds.
Fortunately, I did get some nurturing, but most pastors didn't. And that's why guys like Jack Godfrey, when he was on the other night, he also was hit by emotion. Now, his emotion is different to mine. Mine's not feeling nurtured. I've learned to cry. You know, I've learned to be emotional about it, and I'm very comfortable with that because I understand. And I fortunately, in my study, in my academic career, and my work, got right to the core of people's lives. You could not find more disturbed and distressed people in life than the people I worked with for years, thousands upon thousands of them. The book that I wrote got right to the core of all those things, which was then published.
What was that book called?
The Tangled Triangle. I'll send you a copy. It's online. You can easily get it download it.
You might be able to share a link here later as well.
Yeah.
Can I just get back up a little bit? So this, you got the call then to Sydney.
Yeah.
This big conversation with Athol was in Sydney when you'd gotten there, or was he trying to stop you getting there?
What happened was Athol was across in America for meetings. Now, Bob Bahar has always enjoyed Sally's writing. They've been friends for years. And unbeknownst to me, at one stage, Sally said, look, we're in trouble in the West here. Is there any way you can help us? I didn't approach Bob at all. And Sally is a wonderful writer. She's an award-winning writer, probably the best writer the church has ever produced.
Really?
And she's an amazing lady. The talent in my wife alone, the church just... you think they got rid of the ministers? No, they got rid of their wives as well. Yeah. They got rid of their children, their sons and daughters who could have grown up in the church.
Huge.
No, it just wasn't just them. It was the influence, the devastation was.
It is devastating.
You know, Sally is she in her writing and food and travel writing, together we worked on the Australian Regional Food Guide, which totally changed the face of tourism in Australia and food. We researched every producer, manufacturer, shop, restaurant, what they were doing, and we put it into 2 volumes.
Yeah. And
then it went online, and that became the resource. All these TV programs you see of chefs and so on, celebrities, Mike Moran, these are all our friends, Lindy Milan. We moved in that circle, another peer group. And it was our research which changed the whole face of tourism and food tourism and the way regional food is regarded in Australia. That's a remarkable achievement for one woman.
Instead of focusing on this authority and power and have to be right, and let's move people along if they're not right, imagine if they'd harnessed the creativity that you and your wife have and put it to use within the church. Imagine that.
Yeah. Well, you know, what Sally accomplished in her writing and in just travel writing alone, she has written literally thousands of articles. We've traveled so extensively for 25 years. She's won awards for her travel writing. I've won awards for my photography.
Yeah. You showed me some before, and it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, all of that is lost.
The creativity in essentially, I guess, the baby boomers, the loss of that creativity and enthusiasm and passion. It's just
because they dared to question, they dared to think. Yeah. And there was no room for them in the church. I had no option to leave but to leave. It was my family. I became a refugee. That's the easiest way to demonstrate it. I was cast out and I didn't belong anywhere. And I spent years wandering the country, foreign land, trying to find my place and who I was.
Yes.
And when I resigned from the chaplaincy, and that's another story, I didn't know who I was. It took me 5 years to find an identity outside of ministry. I was nobody. What do? Nothing. A bit of this and a bit of that. We are so tied up, our identity is so tied up with our job that when it ceases to exist, you don't know who you are.
Yes. Oh,
Very, very traumatic.
and for me, on a lesser degree, I've struggled with that identity as well. I felt like I'm the Adventist musician, and this was my identity, and you kind of lose that, and it's like some hard emotional days.
I didn't know you, but I followed your story. You'd put something up on Facebook, and I saw it. When you put that announcement up, I immediately resonated with you, and I sent you a message.
We were chatting about that offline, and
I knew I knew what you'd be going through.
yeah, and I wish I'd reached out. I mentioned to you that
I'm glad it doesn't matter.
No, but I mean for me, for my own selfish reasons, because as I think I mentioned to you, I received over 300 messages within 2 days after writing, "This is my last Sabbath as a Seventh-day Adventist." And I just couldn't face writing to people. So if there are other people watching that wrote to me as well, I found doing this particular series on Glacier View quite personally cathartic, and I'm going to go through all my messenger and actually and read all these messages. And where I'm going with this is, in Australia, there doesn't appear to be a very healthy former Adventist kind of place people can go to find new identity, to talk about these things. In America, they do have I think it is even called.
There is nowhere for ministers who left or were kicked out to go.
No, not in Australia. What is it? The guy Ratzlaff in America. Oh, he's very well known. He left and has started a ministry way back in the 80s as well. But there's nothing like that here.
But you know, you talked about telling people that. No, just take the next level of being a minister. Highly respected, loyal to the organization, baptizing people, helping raise up churches and building schools. And now you turn around and you're being either kicked out or you have resigned. Can you imagine the humiliation? Because with that comes, he knows the truth and he left it and he's forfeited eternal life. He was deceived by the devil. When I went to the homecoming, I was asked to do a little presentation, and I said, well, I'd like to dedicate this to my colleagues who are not here and went a different path. Talk about the shit hit the fan. Went to 2 committees and finally came back here. Under no conditions are you to acknowledge your colleagues who have left.
That's like
you're not allowed to mention them. I said,
shunning. That's shunning.
I said, it's like having a reunion of soldiers who went to the Vietnam War, but they're not allowed to mention it.
So
I was really, really angry about that. That was my homecoming. This is my peer group. These were my mates, and I was not.
Share your story.
Yeah, and I thought, okay, Adventism hasn't changed much. It's like a time war. I hadn't seen anything for 40 years. And
it's not even just the more conservative element that says that, or the administrative, or the people careful to keep the authority. The liberal, progressive Adventists say stuff like that. I've often had people say, oh, look, you know, we don't want you talking about Adventism now that you're left, and what right do you have, and you can't make any changes now that you've left. And that's the liberal brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Well, look, I could never go back. No one would welcome me. I'd never stand in a pulpit, and I don't want to go back. You know, I've got 40 years behind me. I don't think like an Adventist. I don't live like an Adventist. I'm perfectly content in my spirituality in my life. I've had a wonderful life, and I am not bitter towards Adventism. It's just there is a story that needs to be told.
Yes, I agree.
You need to realize that the ministry, this vital link between the administration and the educators and the people themselves, were degraded. They were invalidated. They were demolished and destroyed in themselves as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's a terrible, terrible thing that happened.
Yes.
And the story's never been told, because where are the ministers to tell it?
Yes, yes.
No one's going to invite them for MVs this afternoon. We're going to have a couple of the old ministers come and tell you what happened to them.
Hopefully SDA&A can address that a little bit by inviting ex-Adventist ministers to come and share their story.
That's up to you guys. Where it goes from here, I don't really mind. But I just think it's time I told my story. It's time that people understood. When a couple of months afterwards, I was talking to Barry Oliver, who has been behind this publishing of the history of the Adventist Church in the Pacific. And I didn't know who Barry was even, except I knew his brother. And I said to Barry, how do you intend to handle the issue of Glacier View and what happened and the changes in the church? And he said, it's too controversial. So here we are looking at the history. And I said to him, you mean to say you're doing a historical research of the Adventist Church in the Pacific, and the most significant event in the history of the church in this century was Glacier View and the changes that it brought to the modern Adventist Church, and you're not even including it in some way, shape, or form? No. And I thought, well, this is wrong. The church is unable to look at itself. And I said, this stuff will be lost. And unless people like me talk about what fell through the cracks in terms of church history, the church itself needs to know, and I owe it to the people to understand that history has been distorted, and look at what falls through the cracks, and you might then start to get a picture of who the church is, where it's coming from. And if you don't have that picture clear, you can never face the future.
Exactly.
You cannot face the future by ignoring your past.
Exactly.
And I don't know where the church will go in the future, and I really have no great interest in it except a peripheral interest. But unless it comes to terms with its past, it'll just become an organization, an Adventist Inc., and it'll continue to target countries like the Philippines and Russia and Korea, where they can still come out with the authoritarian countries and regimes where people are still subject to authorities, still that mindset where they'll listen to the tribe of the evangelists and believe it. And that way see where the church is growing, Africa, these Asian countries, because the people don't question it. And if that's what it wants to be, well, let it be, but I won't be part of it.
No, but you have a heart for those that are like you.
Look, I love my friends in the Adventist church.
I think you said off before we came on that really they suffer from post-traumatic stress, PTSD.
The ministers?
Yes.
Yeah, most of them do. And most of the Adventist congregation suffers from cognitive dissonance. Here's my psychologist coming through now.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I've probably taken enough of your time now.
No, I want to just keep you just for a couple more minutes if I can. We try and go to an hour and a half if we can.
Okay, we've done that.
No, we've only done 1 hour and 15 minutes.
Oh, mine's been ticking over since we started. We're having a chat.
Yes, yeah. I just want to, if that's okay with you.
Oh, I don't mind. People will be going having their dinner shortly.
We've had the people have stayed. There's most people that started have stayed. I'm just looking across at my screen.
All right.
And I'm wondering if we can for first time I haven't done this, but I'd just love if some people could ask some questions.
Oh, no problem.
Some people there, if they could, now's the time. If you'd like to just ask Gordon a couple of questions, because I think it's important to acknowledge your story, and so they might want to make a comment or write a question. If you could do that now, because there's a little bit of a delay on when I receive the comment. I just wanted to go back to you get this call to Sydney,
yeah,
and have this kind of discussion with Athol.
Yeah,
you get the job. We can't. Yeah.
Well, what happened? Athol was in he was the union president. He was across in the States, and Bob called me because Keith Hankinson. Oh, I did mention that Keith came across to Kalgoorlie.
Yes,
he went back to Gordon Lee and said, "This guy is fine. He's spot on. No problem at all." Now, Sally had made this little feelers out with Bob, and the next thing comes this invitation from Bob to come to Greater Sydney. There was none of this business, so let me think about it, Bob. I accepted on the spot. Yeah. I knew I was close to the wind. The drawbridge was starting to pull up, and I had only one chance to get out. And otherwise, I was going to be stuck in Kalgoorlie with 2 kids, a young family, no money, nowhere to go, get across to Sydney, and I hadn't got a clue of what would happen to my life from then. And then Bob somehow got in touch with the ministerial secretary of the other union to do that, to get a clearance on the minister. It was Keith who gave it. So that sermon actually played into my hands. Now, this is the way my life has gone ever since, this incredible providential leading of one cog slotting into the next, into the next, into the next, and stuff that I wasn't aware of. And Keith said, fine, he's good, clear to go. And so Bob called me. And when Athol got back as the union president, he demanded that he had been consulted, but it's between presidents, conference presidents,
Yes.
and the ministerial secretary that approval is given.
Yeah.
And so I arrived in Sydney and put into probably the 2 most rundown churches in the city, and I built them up. I used music. You'd loved it.
Yeah.
I could have done with you there.
What churches were they?
DY Manly.
Right.
And it baffled Athol because he thought there was going to be a repeat. Now, what had happened this is where the interesting links come in. In Kalgoorlie Church, one of the members there was Athol's niece. And she was feeding Athol stuff about me the whole time.
Right.
So Athol was ready for me. And when I arrived in Sydney, it didn't take very long before I was called in front of him and he started questioning me. And the way it happened was the Kalgoorlie Church refused my church membership as being in good and regular standing. And they'd send him a letter with these accusations against me and my wife, the 2 of us. And so my attitude from then on was, I'm not going to play around with you guys. I was starting to get angry and I was becoming assertive and I started to lose the fear that I had. And Athol said, well, we have these complaints from your church and you're not in good and regular standing with them and we've got to sort it out. And so he used that as a pretext to ask me about my doctrine. And to which I replied, Athol said, I'm not interested in talking about doctrine. I said, you've already got the clearance I'm in good and regular standing. My commitment to conduct my ministry within the parameters of the church fundamentals. But I said, you have a letter there which people are accusing me of things. Now, I'd like a copy of that letter.
Of course.
He wouldn't give it to me. I said, okay, if you won't cooperate with me, I won't cooperate with you. And I was up against a guy who then informed me, this is quite unbelievable that he actually said it to me. He said, I have personally been responsible and made sure and been part of the dismissal of 180 ministers.
Whoa.
And that's how I know at least 180 were sacked directly because of Athol Tolhurst.
Amazing, because
And the implication was there, and you will be the next. Don't think you can fool around with me.
that's interesting because when I've heard people talk about a number, it's said that there was 200 counting America and Australia. But that if
This is 180 within Australia he was responsible for, and he was crowing about it. So I lost all respect for him. And then that meeting came to a grinding halt. And eventually I said, I'm not going to cooperate with you. You need to give me a copy. If I don't know who my accusers are and what they are saying, and I can't have it in writing, I'm not going to cooperate with you. So he called another meeting. He called Ray Stanley in this time. So the 2 of them went for me. And these meetings would go on for maybe 2 hours. And then the final one, he called in Keith Parmenter. So you couldn't get more heavies than Parmenter, Tolhurst, and Stanley interviewing me. And poor old Bob Parr was there beside me, and he said beforehand, I can't really say anything. You're on your own, mate.
why didn't Bob say something?
Because they're after him too.
Right.
Look, Bob was my word for Bob Parr. He was Schindler. He saved the skin of so many ministers. He's a remarkable man. He's one of the great heroes of Adventism.
Mm. What was his official title at that stage?
President of the Greater Sydney Conference.
Right.
But he had been the editor of the Record for so many years.
Yes.
Just an absolutely wonderful man.
Yes.
He was intelligent, he was witty, he was informed, and his way with words. He was a remarkably clever but remarkably humble man.
Yes.
So he saved my skin. I owe so much to Bob. Great man. But he said, you're on your own. And to tell you what happened in the final meeting, when these guys are becoming so frustrated, and Parmenter said, well, brethren, we should pray about it. And I said to him, Keith, I'm not interested in praying. I said, we don't need to pray about it. The answer is in your hands. I said, you have there in your possession a document which is libelous. It's slanderous. It's accusing me and my wife of things we have not done, and you refuse to share it with me, and yet you're going to take action, possibly take action, which jeopardizes my career. And I said, we don't need to pray about it. You can have this cleared up overnight. You get on the phone and ring Gordon Lee and tell him that he will to disfellowship to discipline the church board of Kalgoorlie for 6 months, and that those board members be dismissed from their role on the board, and get that church membership through straight away. I said, you can do that. I can't. You can. So we don't need to pray for an answer.
Yeah.
And I said, if my job is in any way, shape or form threatened by this meeting or these meetings we've had, I will personally subpoena the documents and any other document that you have on other ministers. And I found out years later, that Athol had a dossier on every minister in the division. Comprehensive dossier. Every letter of complaint that was made by an elder or a church member that got that, he had that in there. So he knew exactly who he was after, and he was targeting me. And I said, if my job is in jeopardy, I will see you all in court individually. I will not be suing the church, but I'll be suing you as individuals, and I will go for you. It's little wonder when I resigned, they didn't give me my sustentation. So that was theft, open theft. Boy, I could have done with that money as a deposit on a house. I had nothing. I left the church with absolutely nothing. And money that was owed to me, they hung on to it. So there's, I don't have much respect for the organization, but I certainly love its people. And that has never changed, because love is the principle. But you can't love a corrupt organization. And no, I don't belong there anymore. How could I, not hearing what you've heard come from me? But I am a citizen of this world, and I bring the love of God wherever I go. And I have never lost my pastoral gift. No matter what context I am, people seek me out for spiritual guidance and counseling. They don't know anything about my background, but they come to me on a spiritual level. It's there. It flows through me. I'm a pastoral person. And I accept that. I embrace it. So I've never lost my way in terms with God. I'm not a conventional Christian, and I'm not bitter. I'm a very happy man, actually.
Yeah, I can tell. We spend our pre-interview laughing most of the time.
And finish off.
Can you share? I know you're trying to get out of my lair, but
no, not at all. I just don't want to wear it out. That's all.
It's not wearing it out at all. And what's good about it being, so people can come back and watch later, they can press the 10-second forward thing, and
actually, Sal, come up. You don't mind saying hi to my wife?
I would love to.
Come up, sweetie.
The tiny story you told about going to Mildura on the train.
Yeah.
Just hearing you get emotional about that. How long have you guys been together?
51 and a half years. Oh, together? Oh, that's...
since the train.
It doesn't matter. just come and stand over here. Or sit beside me.
Give a quick wave.
Yeah, come and sit here in a second.
We've been married 51 and a half years.
There's room for you here.
And we're going out together.
We'll remove the great controversy so you can see.
Remove the great controversy.
Say later.
I remember it as a bigger book.
Oh, you're thinking important.
I need somewhere to sit.
Okay. Here she is,
Hello.
the beautiful one.
Yeah, as I said, no hair and makeup today.
Hey, that's all right.
We're self-isolated.
This is what the church lost, mate.
Yeah, yeah.
What an asset.
Have you been listening in at all
No, I've been working downstairs.
downstairs?
One of
Well,
the
it's
most
nice to meet you, and
Nice to meet you too.
your young man, your young man has been speaking very highly of you.
Oh, that's good, just as well. So I might watch this.
Yes, watch it. We heard the story of you both, how you kind of met on the train to Mildura, and he kept you in first class. And
Actually, we met in Dubrovnik. We're in Dubrovnik.
with
Not there, that's the green
oh,
screen.
yes, yeah. Us, we see Dubrovnik.
See? Oh, that's nice. It's
Yeah.
probably all we will see of Dubrovnik
Well, I'll show
from
you.
here on.
We're hearing some amazing stories of the journey you guys have had, and one thing that really strikes me is the passion of people and helping people and sharing and enjoying life is coming through. And we were saying that of the many Adventist pastors that left, they left, their wives left, their kids left, the families left. What a loss that was to the Adventist church. And for them to suddenly be silenced. You know, my generation didn't get to hear the stories. I literally, and I've said this before, I literally went from a vibrant local community here in Kurrambong as a young Adventist, 16, 17-year-old, where there was social activities and cool, hip, young youth pastors, to table tennis once a month, Tuesday night, in the Memorial Adventist Church Youth Hall. And we all went, what happened? Where did everyone go? It happened that fast. It was within a short period of time.
Can I just say something here? This is really important to get across. There was not one of those ministers who was a heretic,
No.
or dissident, or disloyal to the organization. They were all men of integrity.
Yes.
They never preached error.
Amen.
And we define them, we see them as those that left the church and went their way of the world or whatever. It was not one of them.
No.
They were the
Wonderful people.
best the church had, the very best, the cream. They lost its administrators, they lost their teachers, they lost their theologians of the future, and left with nothing. I'm not saying my colleagues who stayed on were nothing,
No.
but they didn't, the potential was in those who left.
It lost a generation.
Oh.
Yeah.
A bit like the war did for Australia when
And that's probably why now people are saying, what happened? We have to be accountable. And if
Yeah.
you don't get to talk to guys like me before we die, then it's all gone.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't fool you by my looks, and I'm not going to one day.
When I was chatting,
You're going to die one day.
I'm looking forward to getting mine.
Oh,
When I was speaking, the interview before this one was with Dr. Ken Samples, and he was saying that because he's not an Adventist, but he did lots of work with Walter Martin, that he interviewed 100 or more Adventist pastors during that kind of more late 80s, I think, era, and that would be an interesting resource to get a hold of. And Harry Ballas, who's been watching, and I think he has said on the feed here that he's going to accept doing an interview, and I think he's done a lot of research into Adventist pastors that have left. Is that right? I'll ask him, but and you're on.
Harry did his PhD on, I think it was doctorate on the ministers the demise of those. He interviewed a lot of them.
Yeah.
So he was very well informed.
And I keep glancing over here, not because I'm not interested in what you're saying, but I'm watching my feed of what people are saying. Can I just read a couple of things? Sadly, I should have been looking at it before because people were saying stuff that has now gone out of my view. Someone has said, yes, dossiers still exist. An apology won't happen.
I'm never expecting one.
No.
Not at all.
the super would have been good.
Someone
The
like
superannuation, if they still want to give it to me.
I'm amazed that they got out of that one.
Oh, I looked at legally doing it, and the answer is fairly clear. It'll cost you more in legal costs than what you get back.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
And that
there
wasn't
was no
sustentation. What was it? Was it sustentation?
Sustentation.
Yeah.
There was no precedent.
And because it was written up, sustentation, I think, is a gift, so it's
Yep.
not legally binding.
And there is no precedent in law, and I would have wasted all my money, paid for their expenses, and been even more destitute. I'm not stupid.
Doesn't matter.
Someone liked your comment about Bob Parr running a Schindler's List kind of thing.
Yeah. Schindler. Yeah.
Some people have said they love Mildura. John Godfrey says, "Great to see you, Sally."
Oh,
And Rowenfeld's written, "Don't let him go until he has told the whole story. So many, not just ministers, but lay people who've been disfellowshipped can relate to your pain and your story." So when you were trying to wrap it up before, she wrote, "Hang on, he hasn't quite finished yet." So I'm glad we've kept you here.
I think we did tidy it up then.
My heart cries out, "Give me Jesus." We would see Jesus. And
I'll tell you
Harry has just mentioned, yes, it was a PhD on leaving the Adventist ministry, and it's a book that's available. I'll be able to chat with him more about that.
I'll answer that question to finish the story. Remember I said I knew that night in Esperance that it was finished, but I also knew that the day would come when I would know that I should resign. And I had no inkling of what it would be or when it would be, but I knew it would come. That again is part of my spiritual existence. And I was in a meeting in the conference office in Strathfield, and they were worried about the tithe dropping. The revenue was being hit by the changes in the church and people leaving. So the whole meeting for the ministers meeting, which is a monthly meeting, was about we need to preach more sermons on tithe, and we need to sit down with our treasurers in the church and go through the church roll and see who's paying tithe and not paying tithe. And the whole issue of stewardship was paramount and was urgent because we were running into problems financially. Now, let me say it was not being run by Bob. Okay, Bob Parr. This was one of the other brethren who'd come in and was running this one. And I just stood up and I walked out.
Wow.
I went to Sally and I said, "I'm resigning." And the next day I took my resignation in.
And this was about 84, was it?
Yes, this was the end of 84. And I realized that I could not live in that anymore. It was the final straw.
Right.
It was about business. And nothing about Robert Parr. I felt dreadful, absolutely awful, handing in my resignation. But I knew he'd understand, and he did. He was a very understanding man. He accepted it graciously. I could see he wanted to persuade me, and I could see the change in his face, and he realized as much as I did, no, this is God's leading. And I didn't leave the church. I was led out of it.
Yeah.
I wasn't sacked. I didn't, God led me from the Adventist church into nothing, and for a week I didn't know what I was going to do, and I went around and I thought, I'm going to try that. Both Sally and I had the same thought, Sydney City Mission. So I went up to their head office and I said, is there any jobs available? And they knew I told them I was in ministry. And I got this phone call, which should never have been answered. But Sally had just come back. We had a little shop that she was running, and she came back home for something, and the phone was ringing, and it was the CEO of Sydney City Mission wanting to speak to me. He wanted me to come in for an interview. And within a week, he appointed me to establish the chaplaincy work of the Sydney City Mission. Boom.
Wow.
Was waiting for me. The board had met the week before and said, we need to start a chaplaincy work. And who turns up saying, got a job? So you can't ignore that sort of leading.
Yeah, yeah.
And then onwards, it was, I learned everything I needed to learn about love by being in the mission and the most helpless, hopeless, destitute people in our city. I learned a bit about alcoholism and drug addiction. Eventually, I succumbed, but
your own personal struggles.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, well, look, it has just been really great to chat to you guys, and I've just got to know you kind of now, and I feel like I've known you both for ages, and I can
Well, there's been plenty of ages around.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah.
a similar sense of humour, I think. So next time you're in Cooranbong, please come and I will shout you to lunch at our local cafe. You can
Nice.
choose between one or two.
That would be very nice. What,
And
when one or two people, you have one, I have one, and Sally goes to those.
one or two of us that live in Cooranbong.
Oh, yeah.
There's some nice cafes in the area. Dora Creek here, Morisset, Toronto.
Things have changed. There used to be
Yes,
fish and chips when I was
You,
in
you're,
college.
you're speaking here to the cafe and restaurant critic for the
I know. As I
sort of
was
7
speaking,
years, were you? The food critic for the.
honestly,
Daily
we've
I wasn't a
Telegraph?
critic so much.
We've got an Italian pizza in Morisset that is world class, Paulie's Pizza. We've got Punjabi's Indian, which is world class, amazing. These guys came out of Sydney and moved up this way and brought all their skills and talents with them, and for a more rural lifestyle. So
Well, thanks for inviting me, Peter, and
Been
thanks
really
to the
good.
audience there who are listening. It's very patient of you.
hopefully they do some love hearts as we say goodbye.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Can I do a reaction? Oh, yes, I can do a
I thought
reaction.
he'd have a Three Angels one or something.
Hey, I'll do a very humble reaction.
What was yours?
Not-
Emoji.
Oh, dear.
Sally,
See what
before
they
we
have to
went,
live with.
yeah.
yes, before we went live though, Gordon showed me quite a few things of how to do some Zoom stuff a lot better, which will help me when I do, guitar lessons and things.
Let me just
He
show
only
you.
learnt that yesterday
me
too.
put this-
Oh yeah, right.
I'll share this with everybody here, and I'll share it. That's the sort of pleasure I get in life.
Yeah, you override my computer like that.
Oh, easy. Okay. Next, I'll shut you up.
Now you've hacked into my computer.
But for me, photography has been a very spiritual thing.
Yeah.
You know,
Can people, someone that wrote, can they get in touch with you? What was the name of that website again? Beyond Glacier View? So people can look up that and request to join.
it's a group, a Beyond Glacier group, the Untold Story.
Yeah.
It's a group. It's been going for about a year. I haven't pushed it very hard, and I have a life I have to live and travel. Yeah.
Do you need I could come along. You can be a photographer, Sally do the writing, and I can be the audio guy with the mic boom. And
What's wrong with my mic here? It's a
I'm
beauty.
just trying to create a job so I can.
You can't even see it, but it's there.
You can drive the car.
I'll be the driver.
Yeah, because we're coming up to the stage where we won't be able to rent a vehicle.
Well, I've got a nice big red Hyundai van, so I can drive you around.
All right, perfect.
Guys, we'll leave it there,
Okay.
and great chatting, and look forward very much to crossing paths again down the future.
Who knows?
I'll mix two cultures. Cheers and shalom.
Ah, nice.
Okay.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye. See you then. I'm going to leave now. There we go.
Wow, and there we have it. What a delightful interview. I'm really enjoying this flashback retrospective that we're having, where we every week I'm uploading season 2. This is Peter from 2025 talking now, by the way, if you think it's still me back in 2020. Yeah, so that's number 7, and we've had some fantastic ones already. And thanks again to Lavinia Power for her sponsoring of today's episode. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, please let me know. And they're going fast. Season 2 was an incredible season, and yeah, I'm going to release at least 1 or 2 every week here on in. Now, stick around, because post interview flashback, we have a little bit of a debrief and a chat with those of you in the audience, and sometimes a special guest. And I'm going to be joined again today with Gillian Ford, who has been watching the re-release here in 2025, and we're going to have a little bit of a chat about some of the things that Gordon spoke on one of the things he said was, you cannot face your future if you do not face your past. And yeah, well said. So stick around. We will be back in 5 minutes to discuss, analyze, and listen to your statements and questions on this, what has been a fabulous re-release. Really enjoyed that. We will be back soon.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Da 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 da
Hello and welcome back to our post season 2, episode 7, our post watch party, whatever we want to call it. I'm joined by Gillian. How are you, Gillian? Aren't these interviews from season 2 just incredible? That was just mind blowing, plus
The
fun.
sound's going round and round.
That just means you've got your window open again on the YouTube. So yeah, that was just fantastic. Welcome back to post screening party,
Right.
everybody. And yeah, I was just saying, Gillian, isn't season 2 just incredible?
Oh,
And
it is. It's
we
wonderful.
now are really truly heading into new waters. From here on in, I can only think of one other interview that is actually up on YouTube. The previous 6 are there scattered around somewhere, but now we've got an intentional, concerted effort to get them all onto YouTube and into the general public. And that interview then was only ever available in the private group, and today for the first time it's now out there in the general public, which I'm very excited about, and I hope many people discover and find season 2. It's just mind-blowing, and I had not watched that one back. A lot of them I haven't watched back, and I hadn't watched that back.
Oh,
I was
it was
smiling and
wonderful.
laughing and mind blown the whole time. Yeah,
It was wonderful.
now
And what a wonderful thing you've done, Peter.
Oh, thank you, Gillian.
Let me
Incredible.
see if I can get some balloons. No, it's not working today.
If you do that peace sign you were doing. Thank
Yes,
you,
I
Gillian.
kept getting balloons.
That means a lot to me, and it's interesting just how fresh it feels today, and many that are watching for the first time are really, seeing this literally as if it's just released. I could just put these up without me down the bottom corner, and people that would think they're just being done today. So there was something very interesting that he was talking about, Athol Tolhurst and the Dallas statement that became the 27 fundamentals back then, and fascinating how Gordon challenged him, because Gordon was preaching the new sanctuary view as presented in the new 27 fundamentals, and Athol was having a go at him for that. And so he said to Athol, well, show me in the current 27 fundamentals where I'm wrong, and Athol couldn't. What are your thoughts on that? Because you saw the tie-in between that and the 10 points statement.
I'm really glad that the reason I come on, and I hope people don't get annoyed with seeing me all the time, but that is a very important point, and how intelligent of him to notice about the 27. And I have talked about this quite recently, but it's fairly complicated, and usually I leave it out because just getting the basics down of which statement was what is very complicated. But the thing was, we could sometime look at the actual number 23, now it's 24, on the sanctuary. But the thing about it was that it reflected Heppenstall's view of phases of ministry, whereas before in traditional Adventism, before Heppenstall, we had talked about going into different rooms, and he interpreted it differently, and it had been pretty much accepted, so much so that the GC leaders didn't notice that rather than put the traditional view in the Dallas statement, what went in was Heppenstall's view, which had progressed from the old view. Now, I wouldn't know this, but remember, I was married to Des for nearly 50 years, 49 and a half years. And he told me, he said they actually judged him on the traditional view in great controversy, the harsher view, and not on the Dallas statement.
Very
but
good
after
point.
But after telling people that the Dallas statement exceeded the 10-point statement, to add that extra fact makes it a bit complicated for people to follow. But Gordon picked it up, and he was absolutely right.
Yeah.
And see, Des could have gone with that. Now, what the history of it is, and here you have to read that article that I've told you about from Larry Geraghty, in June 1980, which the one that's online has been taken out. The magazine I couldn't find on archives. For some reason, those are not available. But Larry Geraghty wrote an article about the history of the 27 fundamentals. And I've talked about that either yesterday or the night before, because I've been at this the third time in 2 days.
Fantastic.
And so he explains how this was put together. So in Dallas, April 1980, they finalized the 27 fundamentals. And in Neil Wilson's mind, even though it was probably just fortuitous, they'd been working on the Dallas Statement for 18 months before, but it came in useful for Glacier View. What they did was they were judging Des from what they decided at Dallas. Nothing to do with what happened during the week with the consensus statements. And in October 1979, early in the month, remember that Des did the forum on the 27th of October, so the end of October the year before, Des does the forum. But in the early part, he's in Washington for the third Righteousness by Faith meeting. There was Palmdale, and then there was one in 1978, and then there's one in October 1979. At the same time, roughly the same time, the GC men, I know that Hackett was part of the committee, went to Andrews and showed them what they'd been working on. Oh, Duncan Eva would have been there. He was in charge of the fundamental statement. So they looked at it and they were on it for a couple of days. And the men there didn't like it. It was very disjointed. It was missing things. And so Fritz Guy largely rewrote the Dallas Statement. So then they have two versions, and they don't know whether to use the old one or the new one, which was classically very elegant. It was a very good statement of faith. This is all in Larry Geraghty's article. I'm not telling you something I've made up. A very, very important article, as I keep saying. So Hackett makes the memorable statement, it doesn't matter what you've written, when we get it back to GC, we'll rework it, because they always had a screening committee. This is the same thing that happened at Palmdale. They came up with a beautiful statement. When it got to be to GC, they altered the meaning of justification by faith. So it no longer reflected what had happened at Palmdale. That's another story, but just an added one. So, but what happened was the leaders did not notice that on number 23, they hadn't noticed that the Andrews men had slipped in this Heppenstalian view, which was different to the traditional view, and it was kept in. Because by the time the statement got to Dallas, Larry Geraghty said it had been completely changed from what they'd done in October. This beautiful statement done by the brethren. And then I also mentioned how when they had the committee, Larry Geraghty was the only scholar. And I'm not sure if he went from Andrews to Loma Linda, I'm not sure at what point, but they didn't bring in any of the key scholars to be on that committee. So here, Neil Wilson, Pearson has taken all the scholars off the Biblical Research Committee. That's been done before. And here, Neil Wilson is showing who's going to make the decisions about Des. And so only Larry goes on the committee, and he tells you all the shortcomings of what happened at Dallas, because it was rushed through, particularly that one. And he wasn't happy with the statement on the sanctuary. So that's the long version. Some people, that's Gordon's the only one I know who's picked that up. And Des said to me, but they didn't, when they did the 10-point statement, they went back to the great controversy version. And that's what the young ministers got fired over. Des said they used the 10-point statement to fire people like Gordon. And only Gordon noticed that. I noticed that the sanctuary one had actually progressed.
Yeah. Really glad that just popped up in there and just stood out, and how fortuitous providential that you were watching, because
I
I
don't think I've explained it because I've
Yeah.
said it a lot.
no, you've explained
Because
it
of the
well.
complications of explaining what the different documents were, this one makes it a bit more difficult. But Des did say they fired him by the traditional view, not the Dallas statement, if you
Yeah.
understand what I'm saying, that it had progressed.
Yeah.
And in Neil Wilson's mind, he didn't know the difference. Because in that article of Geraghty, he says it's culturally different, it's written in modern language, but it's the same as the traditional view. We haven't changed anything. He says that quite clearly. They didn't know. They didn't know. And Des told them that many of the things in the consensus statement reflected what mainly Cottrell had done in the Bible commentary. And Des told them, you're going backwards from the Bible commentary. And he said, I'll show you if you like. This was in the Friday afternoon. And they were, I told you, they had a bloodlust. They were there to, if he wouldn't change his mind and say he was wrong, that was it. So they weren't listening. They weren't listening. They didn't really, my impression, of course, you know, I'm a wife and I'm a lay person. I mainly learned what I heard from conversations, really. I'm thinking to myself, they're like the disciples, you know, at the time of the crucifixion. They don't really know what's going on. Now, that might be a terrible thing to say, but that was my impression.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. What were some other thoughts that you took away from today's conversation?
Well, the other thing, to emphasize what he said about Bob Parr, because Bob Parr,
yes.
in my books, I've got many of his letters, and they're as funny as the fight, but he was the biggest defender of Des in the Australasian division. He had to be very careful, but he lost his job at the Record, and so did Eric Magnuson. Keith Parmenter put them out. Eric, to no job in the church. He went and worked, I think, for Canberra University or one of the, I'm not sure exactly where.
Yeah.
And then Bob Parr, which they wouldn't have liked, he suddenly got voted in Sydney. And I think I've told you the story, but the second time round, when Athol was in charge of the committee, he said to them that the vote went against Bob. And for some reason, Bob and Fern were left in the room. And Fern told me this. When they looked at the vote, Bob did pass and Athol hadn't told the truth. So another thing was that you remember when you interviewed Wes Tolhurst that he said his father told him that he had nothing to do with the firing of the young ministers. Well, he did. And Gordon mentions that 180 ministers were got put out. And the fact he mentions that Athol had, you know, he had a database on every minister.
Yes. And that's
no, he went out to hunt. I could,
yeah.
you know, the Ayatollah.
It's an interesting one to ponder, because a lot of people have said, oh, well, people were leaving at the time, and we don't know that it's around 200 because there was, you know, people leave anyway and this kind of thing. But to actually claim, no, I was personally responsible for, you know, retiring over 180 at that point we're talking about too. There was more to follow. That's that's a revelation that right there.
And just one more point, because you said we haven't got a lot of time. So stop me at any point. It's quite all right. I'll do it later.
No, it's good.
He's not into Des. And in other places, Gordon had said, oh, why bring Des Ford into it? He wasn't the only one. And that is true. But Des, and that will become obvious when Doug Hackelman finishes his book with the part on Glacier View. And he does a whole history of all the people who have opposed the investigative judgment and put out. It's very comprehensive. And remember, I read that manuscript when he'd written 32 chapters up to Glacier View. He sent it to me about 2012. It was a long time ago. And he sort of set the work aside, and he's back on it. He lists all the people who took the position roughly that Des did, not in such detail. So you do see that, but Des was probably a better speaker and had done more work on it. So he's the latest and probably the best. So you've got
He was
John
the lightning
other
rod.
night- yeah, John the other night and Ken Samples, and they see the genius of Des, and that his, you know, I'm grateful for this because I want to see Des as he's been put down so much by the scholars and by others, and of course I don't like that, so I'm bound to.
Well, can I just say something to that? Behind the scenes, when I was growing up, and a lot of my family friends and their parents were scholars and academics, and we would hear a lot behind the scenes, and all of them held Des in such high regard. What we found out in season 2 is there were little kind of put downs of Des, only because they were now speaking in public and they can't be seen to be too supportive of him. So I would suggest that 90% of what you hear as negative towards Des is that just them trying to, save grace. Because growing up, all I ever heard from the scholars and academics, many of whom were on season 2 when I was a young boy, many of them quite shocked me as they would sort of subtly put Des down. Because I thought,
a lot of it's arm wrestling. That's what
I mean.
I'm smarter than Des Ford,
Yeah,
and I know what's
ego
happening.
comes in, defending their
bothers,
position.
That bothers me with Gordon, but I do understand it. And one thing about Gordon and his brother at college, they were there for the fun. And I can remember Ken Lawson told me that one time they were such pains in the neck that somebody got a fire hose, the fireman, he did tell me who it was, and they shut the windows on their 2-floor place where they lived, and they filled it up to the top with water to get even with the Hammond boys.
The Hammond boys,
so
John and Gordon.
He wasn't into him. Well, that's all right, I'm over it. But I thought it's an absolute, all of these programs, the last 3 that we've watched, they're just outstanding. And as you say, they're very current.
Yeah.
I mean, what a wonderful thing it is. And I just got back another 100 and something pages of volume 9. So there's only 120 to go to be proofed. So it's coming. And I'm so grateful to have that done.
Yeah.
Such a huge job, but I'm grateful that,
it's going to be a wonderful addition to us. Yeah.
So we've done something. We've tried to do something, even though, we'll never see the results of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope people come in the future and can even further distill and take out the gems that are there. And I hope in my lifetime to even do that somewhat as well.
The other thing, if I've still got a minute,
yes,
I thought of something else. Gordon's quite liberal, and he's a very practical person, and in a sense, the practical is more important. But if you don't get see what I did it. If you don't get the basic beliefs right, then you can teach error. And all the nice talk about love and everything, it's important. There's nothing wrong with that. But he does put down the Apostle Paul. And this is a common thing in Adventism, to want to look at the basic teachings of Jesus and to denounce Paul because they don't like his attitude towards women. It's a very superficial thing. But I'm working on something at the moment. I bought the textbooks. One of them I thought of sending you because I think it's Michael John Beasley, but I may have the name wrong. He's a Baptist minister about N.T. Wright and his views on justification, which he and David Wenham call the greatest apostasy in the Christian church today because it downplays Paul. You've got to remember that Jesus gave Paul a mandate, and we should listen to what Jesus said. What he says is important. There's an antagonism to him, which partly comes from you know, his persecution of Stephen, he's always been under suspicion. But he's the one who teaches about righteousness by faith, and it's under fire from both sides. This is what I say to you about the progressives. They're a mixed bunch, and one group are quite liberal, and they're anti-poor, anti-justification by faith. They talk about justification as a legal fiction. So, you know, I don't think I'm the right person to deal with these things, but nobody else is doing it, so I'm going to have a go.
I think, and I've said this to you before, there is a Desford gospel that hasn't fully been grasped by even the progressive Adventists that love Des, and may have been more fully grasped by those outside the Adventist church. You spoke yesterday of the Manchester manuscript. Can't wait for that to come out. And I can't wait for my interview coming up at some point with John Rosier about what Adventism could have been, because I've got a feeling that he encapsulates what that kind of theology looks like, what that gospel looks like. So I can't wait for that, because I think it's going to really tie together a lot of what you say and what others have said and put Des's teachings into a very clear perspective.
Now, Des spoke to this, as I've mentioned, when he went to Campus Hill, because he was invited by Adventist Today and Larry Christoffel, who was mentioned by Ken Eastman.
Yes.
And you interviewed Larry, and his talk must be kept. In fact, I will give you the money to do that.
Well, that one's coming up, number 40. So we've just hit number 7 today.
Well, do it early and I'll send you some money. Because
I'll put your name beside it right now, because a lot of people are already taking lots of the episodes.
But Des dealt with these issues. He went over to Loma Linda to deal with moral influence theory and Norman Wright, who was part of the Jesus seminar. Now, for me to do some work on this, I've got to read a lot, because I know the differences, but to be able to write about it, and I haven't really had time. I'm sort of starting to work on it. It's very important, because otherwise you're running around with a message that it doesn't have the dynamite, the dunamos, the power to change people's lives the same way.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's my opinion, and I'm working on it.
That's fantastic.
One of these days down the line, I'll have a rest.
And it's lucky that we've got people that, you know, support what you're doing, what I'm doing. And I think of people even like, I won't mention names, but there's people I know that are great at kind of articulating and condensing a lot of this stuff in ways that I can't do. So, you know, the information is being put out there.
I'm feeding books to John Rosier. I'm sending him stuff.
Great, yeah.
Because he can do it better than I can ever do it. And poor man, he'll be glad when I'll stop.
No, he won't. He loves it.
What I was saying was, if you want to know what the issues are, Des did at least, and he had the notes in all his documents, he did at least 9 sets of documents, of notes for those meetings. He was very, very sick when he shouldn't have gone. The doctor told him he shouldn't go. He had pneumonia and he was extremely ill, but he would go. He wouldn't let them down. And you remember when he stood up, if you listen to the background, he's sitting next to Larry Christoffel, and he says to Larry, look, when I can't stand up and hold my Bible, when I stand up, would you hand it to me? He was so weak. He was so weak, but he would do it, and he did a great job. But the content, that's what it's about, particularly where you have the interview with Fritz Guy, Kendra, John Pauline. They're all into this sort of stuff.
Larry Garrity's in there.
And I've transcribed them all. They're in my book somewhere. And remember, I've got an index if people want it. Somebody wrote to me the other day who works at the division. A bit worried about that. Never mind. But those talks are in there, and Des goes over the arguments with Fritz Guy. So that, if you're interested in that topic, that's where you'll find it. And those are on Fleetwood Mac's
YouTube channel.
YouTube channel.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I'm done.
Brilliant. Thank you for joining me today, Gillian. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll just bring a couple of comments up. But yes, if you'd like to sponsor a program, Lloyd Grolleman is next week. Someone might want to sponsor that. Then we've got soon after Lyle Heiss, Harry Ballas is going to be on, Irish Yob. I think that one may have already gone. Graham Fraunfeld is coming up very soon. And some of these people will be invited to join me. We've got Jafet D. Oliveira from the One Project's coming up. I can't wait to revisit Dr. Alden Thompson's interview. That's going to be interesting. John Carter's coming up. Very popular one, which I'm surprised hasn't gone yet as far as sponsorship, is the Dr. Ron Numbers and Jonathan Butler. Got Richard Coffin, Steve Ferguson, George Knight, Harry Allen. Remember that one that you put me onto?
Oh,
The guy
yeah.
that's the into the hip hop stuff. Len.
I didn't know. He's so modest. I didn't know his musical
hilarious.
background.
Well, you
I
mentioned
know him
him.
very well.
Yes.
He
and
came over to visit Des. He was coming to some conference. He was a teenager when Glacier View happened,
yeah.
and a fan ever after. So he came and stayed with us. And I've got a memory of me with his suitcases, taking him to his hotel while driving beside Devon, him walking down the road like this.
We've got Doug Hackelman coming up. Got a couple with you coming up as well. Matthew Cortman, Fritz Guy, Larry Geraghty. Just go, everybody, to the top of our SDA Q&A group. Click pinned post or featured post, and you can look down and see all the episodes there of season 2. And if you'd like to promote a book, a website, a link, just like today, Lavinia Powell sponsored the program, and just her name. She said she just loves watching the show and wants to support what we're doing. So we're going to leave it there. Just a couple of quick comments. Gillian, you must have been proud of Des after that October Forum presentation. What a pivotal moment in time.
Yes, and I've told you that when he left the house, he said, nobody will come out for this. And it was the first forum meeting they'd ever done at PUC. That's important to know.
Yeah.
And in Wayne Judd's book, which I handled yesterday, his biography, he has a chapter on the forum because he and Adrian Sikorsky organized it, and they thought maybe 20 people would come. So they had 2 venues, a classroom, then the music hall, which was a small room like the one I'm in, full of instruments, so it would have only fitted 20. And then when they came, there was 900 or 1,000.
Because they had a second room they chose, and that wasn't big enough. And then they went to the big one that held 1,000 people.
And in those days, we didn't have phones with camera. But I stood at the bottom of the stairs, going up the back to Irwin Hall on the left, nearly 1,000 people going up the middle. I tell you what, it was exciting.
No one took any pictures of it. I can't find any pictures online of the day, and we had cameras in 1979.
No, I don't think there were any photos. Yeah. I don't recall any photos. And to me, the meeting, about 2/3 of people would have been with Des, because some of the people who supported him, and one person flew in from Nebraska. They asked how far people had come from. But when Wayne does it, now this is very interesting because different people's views go down in history, and he's a historian. But Wayne was have you got to go?
No, I've got 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. Wayne was a very dramatic personality, and he describes Des sort of as though he's himself. And Des was pretty quiet. He wasn't, to me, he wasn't like what Wayne said he was, that when he first met him, he felt this presence. And, that Des, when he stood up to go on the stage, he said, it's time. I just can't imagine Des doing it, but I'm not saying but if you knew Wayne, he took part in a local presentation of Camelot. He had a beautiful singing voice. He was part of that small group who came from PUC to support Des and Smuts. And in his book, he says that he sang at the office, but he actually sang in our lounge room. And all these years, there was 45 people there. Nobody let it out because they would have all been fired if they'd known The songs got heard
Song-
back at PUC.
Because there's a
And
few
these
songs.
songs
wasn't there?
were about.
Yeah, I remember we did a show on them. It's somewhere here,
That's right.
and they're on here somewhere.
So he mentions these in the book, but he's pretty careful about where they were played because he said it could still have repercussions.
It could to this day have repercussions.
Well, I've
Oh,
told
yeah.
you now.
I'll do another show on them because
But look,
you sent them all to me.
marvelous.
7 or 8 songs. They're great. Like they're
Well,
parody.
I think Eric Anderson, who ended up as the president of PUC, was there, Adrian Zukoski and Wayne Judd. So you've got a historian, sociologist, and another American religious historian, Millerite. Very dramatic was Wayne. Wonderful person. I mean, the loss of those 2 men,
Yeah.
oh, like Gordon, is the saddest thing to me.
Yes.
Um,
yes. That was the
and
other
then the
thing I
other
wanted to
person-
highlight.
I can't think of his name, but he worked in the woodwork department.
Mm.
And, you know, they'd never, I don't know if they ever sung together, but I think it was Adrian who sat in the back and who wrote all the words to hymns that were known. And there was a whole lot of them.
Yeah, and they
A
changed the
Mighty
words.
Fortress is Gerhard was one of them. And we will never think again. No, we'll never think again.
I love it. So classic. You've inspired me. If we didn't do a show on them, I think we did. I know I've got all the songs. I'll
And
do
another one about Wilson.
Yes, that could apply to Ted Wilson.
They
to
were
this day.
marvelous. And
Yeah.
then, of course, they went back to PUC and they went round to show their friends. And they're at Larry Mitchell's place.
Mm,
Larry did an interview. He told you about the songs. So
that's right.
that's another one.
Yes, that's.
So
gonna be
I'll either support you on Larry Christoffel or Larry Mitchell. That's an important one.
You can do both if you like, Gillian.
Dean Hardwick was next door visiting and he came out and he heard them singing through the window. So he reported them. They were in big trouble.
Wow.
But they never found out where they sang them.
Well, they survived to this day. I'm going to go and hunt them this afternoon.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Gillian.
Okay.
Just one last quick post I'll bring up. And one thing I want to say, people like Sally and Gordon, incredible, creative, wonderful people, part of that 200 that were lost. And it wasn't just 200 pastors, it was their wives, their kids, their husbands, friends. It was just such a tragedy and a big loss to the Adventist Church. And Gordon mentions, and he's very matter of fact about stuff. He and I butt heads sometimes, but I still love the guy, and hopefully it's a mutual feeling. But he says, there were other people, not just Des, but you've got to realize that I think a month before, there was another forum with Cottrell. I thought at the same place, but it didn't make any waves, and yet he was saying similar things to what Des was saying. So there's a time, there's timing. Des had a certain charisma, a way of speaking, a knowledge, a way of articulating things in a really concise way, and he was the lightning rod, and bang, it hit. And
so Cottrell spoke at Andrews University a week before.
That's right.
But only to the faculty.
Yes,
but
still it made no splash.
And then at Loma Linda, I think 2 weeks later, so a week before and a week after, something like that, again to the faculty. And Cottrell, he criticises Des as having poor judgment because it went out to everybody. But see, Des didn't have any choice in it, and they genuinely thought nobody would come.
And the reality is when people say that that's poor judgment, all they're saying is, hey, keep it quiet, put it in your back pocket. And Des wasn't that guy. And neither was Gordon.
No.
And neither were...
See, they thought it was all right to talk to each other. It's the same now. It's no different.
Yes.
Back then, we knew the workers.
And back then I cut them some slack, but now I'm saying it's weak. Now, get off your butts, start speaking. But yeah, Andy Mack wrote, Des was the catalyst and the fuse for the bomb to come.
And I think that Ken Samples had a good picture of Des. He was pretty direct.
Yeah.
He wouldn't back down, like with Walter Martin on the State of the Dead and the Sabbath. he wouldn't mince words, but he was so polite and genuinely Christian, and that's what has always marked him. And people, you know, that dealt with him when he was dying, they marveled at him. They said, "This is a special man. This is a special man," because of the way he behaved, and he was no different at Glacier View.
Yeah, yeah. Elizabeth just writes about the sustentation, how that was calculated, and I think she mentions that her parents also lost the sustentation, which is absolutely shameful.
Well, at the time, it wasn't legal.
No,
in
because
America.
they had it written up as this is a gift, but they did that for tax purposes.
I know.
The reality is
at
they
the
were offering
time-
super, yeah, but they used it. They wielded taking it away as a weapon. And if there's any lawyers watching that could maybe think, is there still a chance we could get Gordon and Sally sustentation? They don't care. They've moved on. I'm not speaking on their behalf in any way. But boy, wouldn't it be great if some of these people got some of their super back now that they're, you know, in their late 70s, etc. There are people I know
we got
today that
something.
are too scared to leave the church because they'll lose their sustentation, and they're already retired.
Well, we were given the choice of a payout, which was a few months' wages, possibly 6 or 7 months' wages, and our fares back to Australia. But see, they had to, because it was so public, they had to do something. Now, when I came back here, I thought I would try to at least get health insurance. I just see, because it wasn't a lot for 30 years service. And the choice was either you take this or take the chance of getting sustentation, but it had a lot to do with Des not misbehaving. If you behave yourself, we might give it to you down the line.
Yes,
so
right.
Des took what was offered, and we were grateful for it. But when I contacted the head of sustentation, he said, "You were fortunate. You got something. Most people got nothing."
Yeah.
In America, like Walter Ray, he would have sued for sustentation because there legally you had to pay it, but in Australia at the time you didn't.
No, and and I think you don't have to still in Australia. Just a couple of quick more comments. I've got to race out the door, but MC writes, yes, there were plenty of people in the balconies. Malcolm, were you there? I can't remember, or you had a relative that was there. He writes, yes, it was just an electric atmosphere. MC also adds that he remembers walking by the house when they were singing those songs. And he would have loved that because he would have gotten the joke, the parody.
They threw caution.
It shows here. Look, yes. And Andy Mack says it just shows how even Adventists are craving the gospel for that many people.
Well, we know many people in Adventism who know the gospel.
And I think many of them are craving it today. And MC writes, seems like Cottrell was always trying to keep a lid on things. And look, the reality is that if you have got something to shine and you don't shine it because you're too worried about what people think, you're going to just have this kind of obscurity put around you, and don't complain when the joy doesn't expand around you.
Cottrell, to me, as I've said before, to me, he was an angel dressed in white with wings, the recording angel, because he wrote everything down, and he was a true hero. I couldn't criticize him at all.
Well, back in the day, this is what I'm saying. I'm cutting those guys some slack, because back in the day, there was a lot to be lost, and they heroically fought behind the scenes. What I'm seeing today is that there's less to lose, but they're still silent, and there is still just as much to be lost, but they are still silent. And I think the progressive Adventist movement just needs some heroes to stand up and really. I think it's time to make a stand publicly for what they really believe.
Well, I still believe in freedom of conscience. It doesn't bother me at all.
I'm just saying, I'm just using my freedom of speech to say what I think they should do. I'm not saying they should do it. There's a nuanced difference there. MC says, he was
and
there.
It's a situation that it's like I said yesterday something about Trump, and I got called a Trump hater over on the chat. However, people overseas who see what's happening see it differently to a lot of Americans. And it's nothing to do with, for me, with apocalyptic views of the Sabbath, because I don't believe that. Being a last day test.
Yeah, there's so many
It's my observations living in America of the sort of person that he is, and that he's not fit to be a president.
Well,
and that he's greedy, lawless, a known liar, bankrupt about 6 times.
But this is the nuance. Poor. This is the nuance thing I'm saying. This is the nuance thing I'm saying is that's your opinion. You're not saying people have to follow your opinion. My opinion is
but see how people are falling in line with him. They're starting to resist a bit now, as in Wisconsin. But it's the same principle, Anyway, we won't talk about Trump. What I think doesn't make
you and I are the best at getting off the path.
Well, it is.
It's always fun.
Yeah, but it's about this idea of caving in.
Yeah, that's right. And I totally respect Cottrell and all those guys. I'm like you. I think those guys back then, it was different. They had to kind of keep their head down. There was a lot more to lose back in those days, and they felt a lot more hope. They really believed that if they quietly did it behind the scenes, it was going to change. And I said to Bill Johnson, who said that to me, and I think I cut it out of the interview. I need to watch it again. He said that he wished he wished Des had just been quiet, put it in his back pocket, and it would have changed, he said. And I said to him, well, how did that work out for you? Because it hasn't changed. And he kind of went, and I think I did cut that out because it did make him look a little bit bad at the time. But
that was the general view that evolution,
and,
as Hammond said, evolution, not revolution. But
and that's what I'm saying to the guys today, the progressives today. I'm saying it demonstrably doesn't work to be silent. Back then, respect, good on you. Those guys did, like you said, Cottrell kept notes. Was he the one that did shorthand at Glacier View?
Yes.
And that, what incredible resource we have. I can't wait for Doug's book to come out on Cottrell. I see these guys as just, really wonderful.
Most people don't know Doug, but he's one of the best writers in the church. He's very, very good. And of course, if you want to see his Adventist Currents, you would love it if you haven't looked at it. Have you looked at it?
I have looked at it, yes.
Hackspace.
Yes, so good.
Hackspace or place, one of the two.
Yeah.
And you can read all those old issues, and I've put some of them in my books.
Yeah, gold. Yeah. There's gold out there, and I think it's time for the gold.
And there's gold coming.
Start digging, and there's gold coming, and they're gonna lose it all unless they get off their backsides and start shouting it from the rooftops. I
remember Larry Christoffel, that most of you don't know. He's another Reformation's scholar, and he was going to be an engineer. He's brilliant. He's very like Cottrell, very intelligent, and
still alive.
He's been in and listened to, I don't know, it's all the tapes of Glacier View, and he also does shorthand.
Right.
And has done, well, I won't say anything. Cannot reveal my thoughts.
I'm so looking forward to re-releasing season 2, because for me, I'm getting to watch a lot of it again for the first time. I was there in the front seat, in the front row, and now I'm watching them back, feeling like, oh my goodness, I didn't
they are powerful.
Realize how amazing they were at the time.
No, I didn't either. I mean, I listened to them the first time. But
they're coming.
Yeah.
Angela Lima writes a little bit about Walter Ray, and I just mentioned this, bringing it up because it's available now. Walter Ray was going to lose his sustentation if he released Pirates of Privilege. That book's all about the Davenport fiasco. It's available online. Just look up Walter Ray, Pirates of Privilege. You can read it for free. Okay.
I've put Pirates of Privilege in one of my books. I don't know which one.
Oh, good.
With it, I've got an account of how we went down to visit Walter Ray. I've forgotten what year it was, but it was early, to find out what he was really saying. And then Des writes a letter to Walter and Helen, which is to know what Des really thought of what Walter said. Walter was a really good man. He got very angry with them, and he had a right to be.
He had a
He
right.
knew about all this,
100%.
all the stuff that Gordon talks about has
Yeah.
been endemic through the church
100%.
because of the elite families.
Whether I've been wanting to do an episode on the elite families, but the person who would most be able to help me with that doesn't want to do it till her parents pass. So hopefully I'm still around.
Well, I've got a pretty detailed family tree on the Kent family and the Wilsons, but
let's do it. They even link. See, what are you saying? You're too scared to.
It's not a matter of being scared. It's because there's always good and bad, and there's a family to think of.
That's
there's a family to think of. As with Wes Tolhurst, my heart bleeds for him, really.
And I love that he totally got on super well with his dad. In the interview I do with Wes Tolhurst, he has wonderful memories of his dad. They got on super well. Awesome. Tick. Job done. That's what a father's supposed to do, is raise his son well and get on with him. And Wes is an incredible human. So, like you say, there's good and bad in everything. Good and bad in all of us. But there are certain systemic problems that need to be addressed. And you don't have to deal with the individual people, but the Adventist Church has got a nepotistic problem. So we're not trying to reveal the problem as in shame the people, but there's a systemic problem that needs to be addressed and revealed. We can just change the names. There's family B and family C, and here's family A, and they're related to family D. Well, thank you, Gillian. Thank you, everyone, for your support. There's my PayPal if you want to throw a couple of dollars my way. And don't forget, sign up fast for these episodes. Let me know, because they're going fast. And
so tell us how we pay it without using the
phone. What I'm doing, because I'm unorganized, everyone in Australia, I just send my bank details. If you're overseas, it's PayPal. But I don't take any money until the week of the show because I'm unorganized. So what I do is I write it down on that featured pinned list. You can see all the names. I've just written your name down beside Christoffel. The week before I come to an interview, I write to you and say, Gillian, you've put your name down to sponsor this show. Here's my bank details.
Okay.
And I'm only charging $150, which is nothing compared to the amount of exposure that these get and compared to what other people charge for sponsorship. But there it is. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And we will see you tomorrow. This time, Tyler Morgan is our Good News Fellowship presenter. Can't wait. See you, everybody.
This is quite fun. You know, if people turn up after the talks, we still have fun.
It is, yeah. It's great.
They do seem to still be going.
Yeah. What can we have got more people. What can we call our post-season 2 party, watch party? Anyway, we'll work out something. And you're welcome to join anytime, Gillian. If you're watching, just send me a message on your come. Anyone can.
Well, if I have a sudden thought.
Yeah.
Which I seem to.
Yeah, well, it's awesome. And I'm topping and tailing the actual episode with the intro and the outro. And I'm trying not. I'm not going to talk during each one, so that way people can listen to 2020 interview and not have my voice coming in from 2025 and getting confusing. So anyway, we're just chatting now. So see you, everybody. See you tomorrow. Bye.